Hi, Dr. Margaret here. Today I'm sharing with you a preview from another podcast I love and think you will too. It's called The Happiness Lab. There, Yale professor Dr. Laurie Santos shares evidence-based strategies to help you live a more joyful life. Each episode, she's joined by incredible guests, and together they explore the science of the mind to discover the best way to flex your friendship muscles, unravel the mystery of why fear and pain can feel good, and examine the you only live once philosophy and why it doesn't work like you think. In the preview you're about to hear, Laurie is joined by U.S. Surgeon General Vivek Murthy to talk about a massive public health crisis that has touched nearly all of us at some time or another. He calls it the invisible epidemic, loneliness. So, if you're feeling lonely, what can you do? And you know, I like tangible suggestions. To learn about how to make friends as an adult and how to make meaningful connections with the people around you, check out this preview as well as the full episode on the Happiness Lab.
It's Miami in the 1980s, inside a local elementary school. And one of the students, Vivek, is feeling out of place. He's new to the city, new to the country even, and he's experiencing something that many of us are at least a little familiar with. Vivek is feeling lonely.
Experiencing loneliness had very much to do with shyness. I was actually not deeply introverted. I wanted to spend time with other people, but I was really shy and I had a hard time making friends.
Young Vivek lived in the shadow of that loneliness. The schoolyard, his homeroom, and lunch tables may have been bustling, but no one seemed to stop to get to know the shy young boy in their midst.
Going to school each day was stressful. I was always worried about cafeteria at lunchtime and sitting alone. I was worried about what would happen on the playground when people were choosing teams, and I was worried that I might be chosen last, even though I had good athletic ability, but I just didn't have a lot of close friendships with people.
Vivek's feelings of sadness and isolation extended beyond the school day. He went home to a supportive family, but he held his loneliness closely. It was his secret, his biggest source of shame. It was something he wasn't willing to share with anyone.
I was embarrassed. I didn't want it to seem like I was somehow deficient in some way or unable to interact with people.
Vivek's shame was compounded by a sense of guilt. His parents had moved several times in only a few short years, looking for the best place to raise a young family. Despite his age, Vivek could sense how difficult this was for his parents. He didn't want to burden them further by revealing his unhappiness.
I didn't want them to think that somehow this was their fault. My parents had just come to the United States. They were dealing with a lot of different stresses and trying to figure out how to make sure we were okay in school. And they were working really hard at that. And I just didn't want to make them feel like somehow they were falling short. And I don't think they were falling short. I think they were doing everything that a parent needs to do.
If you've listened to previous episodes, you've probably heard that our minds are often unreliable, that we're prone to rationalizing or putting a positive spin on our tough memories by editing or forgetting them. But Vivek's early experiences of loneliness are still seared into his brain. They've even given him a new mission in his career. Today, Vivek, to give his full title, is Vice Admiral Vivek H. Murthy, MD, two-time Surgeon General of the United States. Vivek's tackled many public health priorities while in office, but one of the issues he wants us to take more seriously is loneliness.
Loneliness seems to be a near universal experience. It's far more common than we think, and it's also much more consequential, both for our health as well as for how we show up in life, whether that's for our families, in the workplace, or in school. So that's what led me on the path of focusing on loneliness.
We sometimes tell ourselves that loneliness affects only a sad minority of people. The widowed, the withdrawn, the weird. We think that a busy life in a bustling office, school, or workplace means that we can't be lonely, that having kids or a loving partner can satisfy all of our complex social needs. And we usually assume that friendships just happen without our having to put in the work needed to seek out opportunities for connecting. But as you'll hear, our minds tend to lie to us about how social connection really works. And the truth is, loneliness is much more pervasive than we think. In fact, if the statistics are right, it's even possible that you're feeling lonely right now. And if you are, what can you do about it? How can we fight our feelings of emotional isolation so that we can get all the happiness benefits that come from other people? Our minds are constantly telling us what to do to be happy. But what if our minds are wrong? What if our minds are lying to us, leading us away from what will really make us happy? The good news is that understanding the science of the mind can point us all back in the right direction. You're listening to The Happiness Lab with Dr. Laurie Santos.
If I want to improve my physical health, there's plenty of reasonably specific science-backed information out there. For example, the US Department of Health website lists the top 10 changes I should make to my diet. Things like limiting added sugar or eating more whole grains. The same goes for exercise. The CDC tells me I should do 150 minutes of moderate intensity activity every week, like this elliptical machine that I'm on right now. But despite the impact that loneliness has on our health and well-being, we don't have daily targets for social connection in the way we do for nutrition and exercise.
There's no checklist telling you to say hello to 5 people in your neighborhood, or to spend 150 minutes per week having a real heart-to-heart with a person you trust. But these types of interactions are required for our health and happiness. And not getting a big enough dose could be taking a larger toll than you think. When Vivek Murthy first became Surgeon General, he assumed he'd carry on the work of his predecessors, concentrating on health problems like obesity, smoking, and the opioid crisis. But loneliness, that feeling he remembered so vividly from childhood, quickly became an important part of his agenda. And that's because feeling lonely can have a devastating effect on our health.
It appears that loneliness is strongly associated with an increased risk of heart disease and dementia and depression and anxiety. People who struggle with loneliness also have fragmented sleep. So they may sleep for the same number of hours as somebody else, but that sleep is broken up and marked by something called micro-awakenings, where they don't fully wake up, but they nearly wake up. And that disturbed quality of sleep affects how restful your sleep is. It diminishes the quality of your sleep.
There's also evidence that loneliness can be deadly. Take, for example, a famous paper by Brigham Young University psychologist Julianne Holt-Lundstad. She and her colleagues used a technique known as a meta-analysis, in which you mathematically pool the results of all the existing studies on a topic to create a sort of mega-study with tons of statistical power. Julianne used this method and pooled more than 100 studies on longevity and social connection. And her results were striking. People with strong social bonds were 50% less likely to die over a given period of time than those who had fewer social connections. And that scary finding may be even underestimating the true dangers of loneliness, since the studies she pulled together tended not to weed out things like bad marriages and toxic friendships from all those healthier social interactions. For a newly elected Surgeon General, such stark findings were hard to ignore.
If you look at the degree of life shortening, if you will, it appeared similar to the mortality impact of smoking 15 cigarettes a day and greater than the mortality impact of obesity or sedentary living.
But there's another feature of loneliness that makes it as much of a public health threat as so many other big challenges. And that's its commonality. According to some surveys, nearly a fifth of people in the United States today admit to struggling with loneliness.
Now, just to put this in context, 22% of adults in the United States is more than the percentage of adults who smoke cigarettes. It's more than the percentage of adults who have diabetes. So this is exceedingly common. And if more than 1 in 5 adults are impacted by loneliness, that means that you likely know somebody who's struggling with loneliness. That very well may be you. It could be your spouse. It could be your friends. It could be your family.
But we tend not to realize that people close to us are feeling lonely, often because they're taking active steps to hide it. Vivek found that people were surprisingly willing to talk openly about their struggles with things like obesity and addiction, but loneliness, not so much.
There was a stigma around loneliness that was also universal, a sense that if you admitted you were lonely, that somehow you were not likable or that you were deficient in some way. And that kept a lot of people from admitting their struggles. But in closed conversations and in private moments, people of all backgrounds and age groups would share that they were struggling with loneliness.
I'll be the first to admit that there are definitely times when I've felt lonely. I mean, I have a wonderfully supportive husband, and I work with a great team of stimulating students and colleagues. I get to interact with lots of great people throughout my day. But those same times when work keeps me really busy are also times when I have little opportunity to see my friends. And this pattern is something I have in common with Vivek, especially when he first started his new job.
I think we can get caught up in that narrative and convince ourselves in almost a martyrish sort of way that we're doing something for a cause greater than ourselves and using that as justification for letting our relationships slide. And what I came to realize in retrospect is that the cost of that misprioritization was greater than I could have imagined.
Vivek's new role meant that he was interacting with dozens of interesting people every single day, even President Obama. But quality time with the commander-in-chief can't make up for missed opportunities to connect with the people we care about most.
I had become distanced from good friends that I had strong relationships for years. I had realized that even this time I was spending with my family was not nearly as high quality as it should have been. As I was often distracted by emails and work and phone calls, even during family dinners and other family outings.
The evidence suggests that just like a balanced diet or proper exercise routine, we also need a variety of social interactions to stay healthy and avoid loneliness. Some of those can be shallow and fleeting. Others need to be lasting and more intimate. Vivek has found there's no single quick fix.
If we're lonely, we need to sometimes do more than just changing the number of people we interact with. Putting ourselves in the middle of a crowd or showing up at a party or going to mixers are not necessarily always the solution to loneliness.
In his fantastic book, Together, The Healing Power of Human Connection in a Sometimes Lonely World, Vivek explains just how complicated loneliness can be.
There are three types of loneliness. There's intimate loneliness, which is feeling that you lack a close confidant, somebody who you can deeply trust with just about everything, somebody who knows you deeply and who you know deeply. And when you lack that kind of relationship in your life, then people experience intimate loneliness. There's also something called relational loneliness, when we experience the absence of friendships, where we would get together with somebody or with a group of people on weekends or on evenings. We may go on vacations. We may call them up, to go to a ball game or to watch a movie together. And finally, there's something called collective loneliness, which is what we experience when we don't have the benefit of identity with a common group. Now, identity may come from a shared interest or affiliation. We may find, for example, that we have a sense of community with the alumni of our college or the people that we go to work with. The truth is we need all three.
Thanks so much for listening to You Get the Gist today, and I hope you'll listen in to the Happiness Lab. And of course, join me on Friday for the next episode of SelfWork.